Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like. It helps more than you might think. On December 2nd, 1937, the people of a small neighborhood in Mexico City were thrown into chaos when Ricardo González, a well-known trader, fell from the top floor of his house. He was rushed to the infirmary by his neighbors, critically injured with severe head trauma and multiple fractures. After a brief investigation, it was deemed a suicide attempt. But the question lingered. What could drive such a successful, outspoken man to such a desperate act? Ricardo remained in the infirmary for several months, defying the odds as his severe injuries gradually healed. When he finally regained the ability to speak, detectives investigating the case pressed him for answers. At first, he refused to say anything, terrified no one would believe him. But under persistent persuasion, he began to speak. What he shared still echoes in the minds of those who heard it, chilling and unbelievable. Here, in his own words, is what Ricardo revealed. "I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I should never have left the water running that day." It was October 23rd, just a week before the Day of the Dead. Known as Dia de los Muertos, this vibrant and sacred Mexican tradition is not a time for mourning, but a celebration of life, death, and memory. Families gather to honor their departed loved ones, creating ofrendas, altars decorated with marigolds, photographs, favorite foods, and symbolic items. The living invite the spirits of the dead to return, bridging the divide with music, feasting, and shared stories. For Martha, my wife, this day was the most important time of the year. She returned that afternoon, beaming as she carried a basket brimming with colorful candles and intricate paper cutouts for the altar. The scorching sun did nothing to dampen her spirits. Her joy should have been infectious, but all I felt was a weight in my chest, a sadness that wouldn't shake. Every year, she poured her heart into preparations for the celebration. Every year, I saw the same longing in her eyes, a longing I couldn't fully understand. It had been nearly 7 years since we lost our son, little Alejandro, but her grief never dulled. That day, she rushed inside holding up a vibrant skeleton motif with a triumphant smile. "Look, Ricardo, isn't it beautiful?" I forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, it is." Inside, my heart churned with conflicting emotions. I missed Alejandro too, more than words could say, but I couldn't bear to watch her reopen the same wound year after year. She seemed trapped in the past, unable to move forward. This year, I wanted something different for us, for her. I wanted us to skip the festival entirely. As she set down her basket, I pulled her into my arms. "Maybe we should skip it this year," I suggested, trying to keep my tone light. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of hurt. "Why?" "We've been doing this for years," I explained, stumbling over my words. "It's time to let go, Martha. We can't live our lives in the shadow of the past. We're still young. We could have more children, start anew." Her eyes filled with anger as she pulled away. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "This isn't just about Alejandro. It's about who we are, Ricardo. Our traditions, our family. Honoring the dead is a part of who we are." I tried to reason with her. "I know he's a part of us, Martha. He always will be. But clinging to the past?" "Clinging to the past?" she interrupted, her voice shaking. "This isn't clinging, Ricardo. It's remembering. Alejandro deserves to be remembered." Her words hit me like a knife. She was right, of course. Our son would always be a part of us, a piece of our lives that could never be erased. Watching her drown in grief year after year was unbearable. It hollowed her out, leaving a fragile shell of the woman I once knew. And selfishly, I felt myself breaking alongside her, piece by piece. Finally, I convinced her to compromise. I made her promise that if we celebrated the festival that year, we'd take a break the following year. Reluctantly, she agreed. The town was filled with preparations for the occasion. Colorful paper cutouts fluttered in the breeze, the fragrance of marigolds filled the air, and the haunting melodies of traditional music echoed through the streets. I joined her in the preparations. As the 1st of November arrived, the day of the celebration, we gathered with our extended family and made our way to the cemetery, laden with food, flowers, and photographs. We spent the day tending to the graves, cleaning the headstones, and placing fresh flowers. We shared stories of our loved ones, laughing and crying. It was a bittersweet experience, a time to both mourn and celebrate. As the sun began to set, we gathered around the graves, lighting candles and offering prayers. She led the traditional songs. The music, combined with the glow of the candles, created a sense of peace, but truly we never knew what exactly we had conjured. The festivities ended, and Martha and I returned home that night. While she lingered outside to bid farewell to our relatives and friends, I stepped into the house. A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, nudging the curtain. As I moved to close it, I heard a voice, a whisper, right beside my ear. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound made me shiver. I spun around, but the room was empty. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of a presence, but there was nothing. Just then, my wife entered the house. "What's wrong, Ricardo?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to explain what I had just experienced. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the incident as nothing. That night, I heard nothing. But the next morning, as I stirred awake, I heard a faint whisper. It said, "Under the bed." The tone was familiar, almost identical to the one from the night before. But then a rustling sound caught my attention. I turned to see Martha going through her belongings. "I can't find my rosary," she muttered. She had searched high and low, but the rosary was nowhere to be found. She thought she had left it back at the cemetery and decided to go back there. I didn't want her to go, but she was adamant. As she began to dress, I heard it again, clearer this time, repeating the same words. I didn't understand why this strange sound in my head kept saying, "Under the bed." The whisper grew louder, repeating the same words, and at that moment, I felt compelled to the edge of the bed. I peered beneath it. There, underneath the bed, was Martha's missing rosary, just as it had said. I pulled it out and handed it to her. She looked at me, surprised. I thought that after that day, I would never hear it again. But that was only the beginning. About 4 days later, my business began to dwindle. I couldn't understand it. The shop that had once been the pride of the neighborhood was slowly dying. At first I blamed myself. Were my products not as good as they used to be? Were my prices too high? I tried everything, slashing prices, offering special deals, but nothing worked. The more I worried, the worse the situation became. One restless night, as I lay awake, the voice returned. This time, it suggested that a rival shopkeeper had been spreading rumors about the quality of my goods. At first, I dismissed the idea. Sabotage seemed unlikely. However, the more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. The timing of my decline perfectly aligned with the opening of a new shop nearby. The voice urged me to confront him, and though hesitant, I did. Initially, the man denied everything, but as I pressed him, his composure faltered, and he eventually confessed to spreading the rumors. Without hesitation, I clarified the situation with my customers, and slowly, my business began to recover. I owed it all to that voice. As time passed, the voice became an ever-present guide in my life. It steered me in every decision, from my business to my marriage, and even the smallest choices. Though I was initially reluctant to tell my wife, fearing she'd think I was losing my mind, the benefits soon became undeniable. Eventually, I decided to share it with her. "Martha, there's something I need to tell you," I began one night as we sat in the living room. She looked at me, concerned. "What is it, Ricardo?" I took a deep breath. "I've been hearing something. It started after the celebration." "Something? What do you mean?" "It's like a whisper, a kind of guidance. It tells me things, big things, small things, and it's been helping me. It saved our business. It's made our life better." She was silent for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you think it could be Alejandro?" Her question surprised me. Could it be our son's spirit? The thought was both comforting and unsettling. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's helping me. Helping us." Martha nodded slowly. "If it's helping you, then I suppose it's okay." From that day on, She accepted the presence in my life. Perhaps if she hadn't, things might have turned out differently. One quiet evening, Martha and I were relaxing on the couch. I had a book in hand and she was crocheting. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a knife glinting in the dim light. "Give me the money," the intruder demanded, his voice tense. Fear gripped me, but I managed to stay calm. "How much?" I asked, trying to buy time. 500 pesos, he snapped. It was a lot, more than we usually kept around, but we had it. I glanced at my wife. She gave me a tense nod. "Just give him the money so he'll leave," she said. As I reached for the cash, the whisper cut through my thoughts, sharp and insistent. "Take the knife," it commanded. "Stab him." Why was it urging me to do this? It didn't make sense. My hand began to tremble as the voice repeated the command. The intruder shifted nervously, sensing my hesitation. Before I knew it, I lunged forward, grabbing the knife from his hand. A surge of adrenaline overtook me, and I plunged the blade into his chest. The intruder collapsed, his body crumpling to the floor. I stared at him, horrified at what I had done. Martha gasped, her hand covering her mouth. She had never seen me like this, violent, unrecognizable. Neither had I. I couldn't explain it. The voice, the sudden anger, it had all happened so fast. The authorities didn't press charges thanks to my reputation as a respected businessman. But the incident left a scar. Martha no longer looked at me the same way. I didn't know this was only the beginning. That night I fell into a restless sleep, but the whisper came again. Its tone was different this time, almost playful. "Go to the bathroom," it commanded. Without questioning it, I rose from bed and stumbled into the bathroom. The house was dark, faint shadows cast by the moonlight. I stepped into the old bathtub. For some reason, I lay down. I didn't know how long I had been there before a gentle tap on my shoulder startled me awake. I opened my eyes to see Martha standing over me, her face a mix of worry and fear. "Ricardo, what are you doing?" she asked. Disoriented, I looked around. The bathtub was the one we used to bathe Alejandro in when he was a baby. The realization hit me like a jolt, and I scrambled out. My wife insisted I see a priest or a doctor. She was convinced something was wrong with my mind. But I dismissed her concerns, assuring her I was fine. Still, the strange occurrences continued. Every morning, I would wake up in the bathtub, the details of the night fading like a dream. Her worry grew, but I remained steadfast in my denial. I had no idea how much worse it would become. One day, I woke up with a sharp pain shooting through my head. When I opened my eyes, I realized I wasn't in my bedroom. The faint smell of antiseptic and the cool air prickling my skin gave it away. I was in the infirmary. The faded beige walls, their surfaces chipped and worn in places, revealed layers of old plaster. A single ceiling fan spun lazily above, offering little reprieve from the humidity that clung to the room. Beside me, Martha sat hunched over, her eyes red and swollen. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry as sandpaper. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor. "How did I end up here?" I asked again, more insistent. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You were in the bathtub." A cold dread swept over me. What do you mean?" She looked up then, her eyes glassy and haunted. "I found you. You were unconscious. You tried to drown yourself, Ricardo." The words hit me like a slap. "No," I stammered. "That's not possible. I'd never—" But even as I spoke, a foggy unease settled in my chest. I had no memory of the incident. None. After that, Martha became overly protective, to the point of suffocation. She monitored my every move, refusing to let me out of her sight. "I'm just making sure you're safe," she said. But her constant watchfulness gnawed at me. Every moment felt like a test, every action scrutinized. I tried to reassure her, to tell her I was fine, but she wouldn't listen. The truth was, I wasn't fine. Not at all. Morning after morning, I began waking up in the bathtub, soaked and shivering, with no memory of how I got there. Martha's worry began to shift into panic. "You can't keep doing this, Ricardo," she pleaded one morning, her voice breaking. "I'm going to the priest. He might be able to help." The voice in my head roared with sudden, violent intensity. "Don't let her go," it commanded. Desperate, I grabbed her arm, the fear in her eyes mirroring the chaos in my mind. "You can't go," I said. "Let me go!" she shouted, struggling against my grip. It wouldn't relent. It grew louder, more insistent, until it drowned out everything else. "Now! Let go!" it screamed. My grip loosened and Martha stumbled backward. I watched in horror as she lost her balance, her foot slipping over the edge of the stairs. She tumbled down, her body twisting as she hit the steps, each sickening thud reverberating in my ears. I ran to her side, panic clawing at my chest. She was unconscious, blood pooling beneath her head. Terror gripped me as I carried her to the infirmary in the city. My wife survived the fall, but something shattered between us that day. After she was released from the infirmary, she refused to come home. Instead, she sought refuge with her sister, leaving me alone in the house. I became a prisoner within my own walls, tormented by the voice and the memory of my reckless act. As the days turned into weeks, the voice in my head grew louder. It was no longer just a whisper. It was a constant, insidious presence, filling every corner of my mind. "Tell her about the bathtub," it repeated over and over. "What bathtub?" I yelled one day, my voice echoing through the empty house. The neighbors began whispering about me. They called me mad. Perhaps they were right. But the presence wouldn't let me rest. It dredged up memories I had buried, memories I didn't want to face. The weight of my deceit crushed me. It was relentless now, demanding that I confess. I went to see Martha at her sister's house. She was hesitant to let me in, her hand gripping the doorframe as if ready to shut me out. But I begged her, my words trembling. "Please, Martha, just a few minutes." The sight of her broke me. She looked older, wearier than I remembered, her face etched with years of grief I had caused. "Martha," I began, my tone raw, "I need to tell you something." She didn't speak. Her eyes narrowed, cautious, but filled with a pain that cut deeper than I could bear. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed to my knees. Tears streamed down my face, and when I tried to speak, my throat tightened. It's about our son." Her expression froze, her hands trembling. "Ricardo, don't you dare." But I couldn't stop. The voice in my head had become deafening, a scream that clawed at my sanity. My hands clutched my temples as a sharp, unbearable pain tore through my skull. "Martha," I sobbed, "it was me. I was supposed to watch him, but I left him. The water was running and he drowned. I was so ashamed. I lied. I staged it to make it look like... Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. Her breaths came in short, shallow gasps as she staggered back. "You let me believe it was an accident," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All these years, you let me grieve. And you lied?" I reached for her, desperate, but she pulled away. "Don't touch me. Don't come near me." Her tears fell freely, her sobs echoing through the room. Each word she spoke was a blade, cutting deeper than I thought possible. The voice in my head finally fell silent, leaving behind a deafening emptiness. The truth hung between us like a storm cloud, and I knew there was no redemption for what I had done. After Ricardo's shocking confession, he was committed to a mental institution. Doctors conducted a series of tests and observations, ultimately diagnosing him with dissociative identity disorder. They theorized that the voice he heard was not an external entity, but a fractured part of his own conscience, split by the unbearable trauma of his son's death, a memory he had desperately tried to bury. You've made it, for now. Thank you for joining on this horrifying journey. If you want more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and to follow on other platforms. There are many more stories to come, and if you enjoyed this, please like the video. It really helps. Let me know your favorite part or any suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, if you can.